The sports world expected Forbes to shake things up with their annual Most Powerful Women in Sports list, but nobody predicted this level of disruption. The 2025 rankings just dropped, and Caitlin Clark didn't just make the list. She stormed into the number 4 spot, the highest-ranked athlete of any sport. That placement sent a message louder than any newspaper headline or league press release. The power structure in women's sports is changing faster than anyone was prepared for. Forbes didn't make this decision on hype or popularity. They used hard metrics: financial influence, earnings, national reach, and real business impact. When those numbers were stacked side by side, Clark pulled away from the pack and forced every critic, every executive, and every fan to reevaluate what influence in sports actually looks like today. Meanwhile, A'ja Wilson landed at number 15. She's a superstar in her own right, a champion, a veteran leader, and the face of several major moments in the WNBA. But that 11-spot difference between Clark and Wilson didn't just spark conversation. It exposed a much deeper shift happening across women's basketball. Because for months now, fans and analysts have pointed to a growing divide inside the league. Some celebrate Clark as the catalyst for a new era. Others argue that veteran dominance and accomplishments deserve far more recognition. That debate erupted into full view the moment Forbes revealed their rankings, transforming what looked like a simple list into a flashpoint that split the sport into 2 eras: what women's basketball used to be and what it's becoming. The moment isn't about who plays better on the court or who holds more trophies. It's about cultural authority, business power, and the changing definition of superstardom. Forbes exposed a truth the league could no longer ignore. Caitlin Clark isn't just winning games. She's redefining the economy of women's sports. And whether you're a fan or a critic, the aftershocks of this announcement are impossible to ignore. But this ranking was only the spark. The fire it ignited is where the real story begins. When the rankings first appeared, most people saw the headline and moved on. But a closer look revealed the most surprising part of the entire list: the criteria Forbes used to determine who truly holds power in sports today. This wasn't a beauty pageant or a fan vote. Forbes measured tangible influence across money, visibility, brand value, and cultural weight. They factored in earnings, business partnerships, social reach, and how much impact each name had outside the court. It was a calculation designed to measure leadership in the sports industry itself, not just athletic success. That formula exposed a hierarchy that had already been shifting under the surface. For years, women's basketball used traditional markers of success: championships, MVP awards, and veteran accomplishments. But when Forbes ran the numbers, performance alone didn't determine placement. The real difference came from business power and crossover impact, how an athlete transformed the sport and the market surrounding it. And in that category, Clark separated herself from everyone else. Clark's presence in the top 5 wasn't just impressive. It reframed how people think about influence in women's basketball. She was recognized not only for her performance on the court, but for the growth she brought to the league off it. Her partnerships, endorsements, and massive fan engagement prove that modern superstars aren't just measured by stats. They're measured by what they bring to an entire industry. Forbes rewarded the kind of impact that lifts a league, attracts new viewers, and creates future business opportunities. Meanwhile, seeing A'ja Wilson ranked at number 15 showed that the hierarchy wasn't based on legacy alone. Wilson is one of the most decorated players in the league, with a resume that speaks for itself. Her placement demonstrated that the landscape has become more complex than simply asking who dominates the scoreboard. Forbes highlighted a new definition of power, one that blends commercial influence, cultural momentum, and how far a player can extend the reach of women's sports into mainstream culture. With one list, Forbes captured a turning point in women's basketball. The traditional markers of leadership no longer tell the whole story. A new hierarchy has formed, one defined by economic influence and cultural relevance. and the rankings proved how dramatically that shift has accelerated. And this wasn't just about the placement of 2 athletes. The list raised a much bigger question. What does power look like in the modern era of women's sports? Because if this is the new standard, then the entire league is about to change. The old rules have already started fading, and the new ones are being written in real time. The financial side of this story is where the shift becomes undeniable. When Caitlin Clark entered the professional world, she didn't gradually build a brand or quietly work her way into mainstream attention. She walked in and immediately changed what the ceiling looked like for women's sports. The average first-year WNBA player earns a base salary that barely breaks into 5 figures. Clark's total earnings reached multi-millions before she'd played a single full season. And that wasn't because of a lucky contract. It was the result of companies investing in her potential to grow the entire industry. The Nike deal alone reset the market. 8 years, multi-million-dollar guarantees, and marketing built around her as a face of the brand. It wasn't just a typical endorsement. It was the kind of investment reserved for global stars across men's and women's sports. For the first time, a rookie became a future-defining figure for a company that had historically saved its biggest campaigns for athletes who had already built legendary careers. Corporate America had made its decision early. Caitlin Clark wasn't just a prospect. She was a business changer.
And that deal wasn't an outlier. Gatorade quickly followed, placing her alongside names like Serena Williams and LeBron James, athletes whose brand value extends far beyond their sport. Then came her partnership with Wilson Sporting Goods, not just another sponsorship, but a long-term collaboration that positioned her across retail displays and sports marketing campaigns. Each agreement added to her financial footprint, proving that for the first time in league history, a single player could carry commercial reach that extended into national brands, national audiences, and national buying power. Clark didn't just cash bigger checks. She created new economic channels that hadn't existed before. Companies saw how her presence boosted viewership, attendance, and merchandise sales, and they acted fast. Broadcast networks started prioritizing her games. Ticket prices surged whenever she appeared. Corporate speaking engagements and the appearance fees that came with them became yet another revenue stream. She wasn't just earning money. She was generating it for everyone around her. That's where the rules changed. For decades, the biggest challenge in women's sports wasn't talent or competition. It was investment. Clark flipped that problem upside down. She proved there was an enormous, untapped market waiting for someone who could bridge the gap between sports and culture. Brands didn't just see her as a player, they saw an entire business opportunity. And once that kind of financial momentum began, the league couldn't go back to the way things used to be. The rise of Clark's earning power forced the industry to rethink what a rookie could be worth, how sponsorships were awarded, and what level of financial commitment was possible in women's basketball. She didn't wait for the system to accept her. She made the system evolve around her. The cultural reaction to Caitlin Clark didn't take years to build. It happened almost instantly. And that speed is where it caught the sports world off guard. Her arrival didn't just create buzz, it delivered measurable results that every network and executive understood. Games featuring Clark began drawing audiences on a scale women's basketball had rarely seen before. TV ratings jumped dramatically, arenas sold out, and her appearances became events that pulled in both dedicated fans and casual viewers who were just curious to see what made her different. The moment she stepped onto the professional stage, the league stopped being a niche attraction and started becoming a mainstream conversation. The media followed the numbers. Clark became one of the most talked about figures in sports, not just because of her performance, but because she attracted attention from places far beyond the usual basketball outlets. Major headlines, national interviews, and primetime coverage shifted toward women's basketball in a way that hadn't been sustained in the past. She became a central topic on sports talk shows and entertainment platforms, pulling the WNBA into everyday news cycles. The attention didn't fade after the initial hype, it kept building, and that consistency proved her influence wasn't temporary. What makes her impact even more unique is the audience she brought with her. Families, younger fans, and people who had never followed women's sports started tuning in. Social media played a massive role in that shift. Highlights, clips, and posts featuring Clark spread across platforms faster than the league had ever experienced. Brands and networks didn't have to guess whether she could draw attention. The data was already there. Every metric showed that she reached demographics the WNBA had been trying to capture for years. That cultural influence extended beyond the court. Clark appeared in cross-sport events, charitable campaigns, and even non-sports conversations about empowerment and opportunity. Media outlets didn't just treat her as a standout athlete, they positioned her as a symbol of what women's sports could become when given the spotlight. The shift wasn't just about basketball popularity. It was about visibility, cultural relevance, and proving that there was a massive audience ready to support women's sports on a national level. Networks reacted immediately. Scheduling changed. Broadcasts began focusing more heavily on matchups involving Clark, and advertisers competed for commercial space around her games. Coverage increased because the demand was real, and that demand kept rising. The effect was clear. The league had crossed into a new media era that wasn't driven by tradition or history, but by momentum. Clark didn't just create attention, she turned women's basketball into a cultural moment. And once an athlete reaches that level of influence, the entire sport shifts with them. The media landscape surrounding the league looked completely different than it had even one season earlier, and that transformation wasn't accidental. It was the result of someone who didn't just excel at basketball, but changed the way people connected to it. The most surprising part of this entire moment is that the change wasn't driven by league executives, ownership groups, or long-term planning. The WNBA had spent years trying to expand its audience, draw new sponsors, and secure bigger broadcast deals. Progress came slowly, and often depended on championship teams or Olympics year momentum. Then Clark arrived, and the usual growth curve completely broke. The league didn't just grow, it accelerated. Suddenly, games that would have aired in small time slots were moved into prime hours. Networks upgraded coverage, social media pages exploded in size, and teams began restructuring their business strategies around rising demand.
For the first time, the league saw what it looked like when a single player could move the entire market. Ticket pricing changed almost overnight. Cities hosting games reported surges in attendance and merchandise sales. Matchups that were traditionally considered regional events became national broadcasts. It didn't matter whether someone was a longtime fan or a newcomer, Clark created a level of excitement that forced the league to rethink what was possible. There had always been passionate supporters pushing for women's basketball to get the stage it deserved. Clark helped deliver the numbers that proved the audience was already there. This growth didn't replace the talent and legacy of the veterans. It highlighted it. Fans who tuned in for Clark were introduced to stars they might not have known before. Viewers who bought a ticket for one game often returned for more. The league didn't just gain visibility, it gained sustainability. When that happens in sports, everything changes. From sponsor interest to long-term investments to the way franchises build their brands. The transformation wasn't just economic, it changed expectations. A young athlete was suddenly showing that a WNBA player could have the same cultural impact that the biggest names in men's sports have enjoyed for decades. The conversation shifted from asking whether women's basketball could attract big-time attention to asking how fast that attention would continue growing. The industry saw a future where salaries, endorsements, and media contracts weren't capped by old assumptions. Clark didn't just force the league forward, she made everyone realize how much room there was to grow. Even longtime analysts admitted this kind of shift wasn't part of anyone's prediction. The WNBA had always been built step by step, season by season. And then one player arrived and accelerated that timeline dramatically. It wasn't hype, it was tangible change, measured in viewers, in revenue, in brand partnerships, and in the league's national presence. The transformation didn't rely on chance.
It happened because the industry finally witnessed what women's sports looked like when the spotlight landed in the right place. And once a league steps into that kind of moment, there's no going back. The future of women's basketball doesn't resemble its past anymore. The foundation has been altered, the market has shifted, and the expectations have been raised for every player who comes next. The transformation that seemed impossible just a few years ago is happening in real time, and Clark became the catalyst that proved how quickly the sport could evolve. A'ja Wilson's place in this moment is just as important to understanding the bigger shift. She isn't a player who faded into the background when Clark arrived. Wilson is one of the most successful athletes in the WNBA's modern era. She's a champion, an MVP, and a cornerstone of the league's growth over the last several seasons. Her accomplishments are undeniable, and her presence has been central to the league's competitiveness and identity. When Forbes placed her at number 15, it wasn't an attempt to minimize her success. It highlighted how many different forms of power now exist inside women's sports. For years, Wilson represented the traditional model of influence: consistent excellence, major awards, leadership on winning teams, and a carefully built personal brand. She earned her way into the spotlight through sustained performance and longevity. That's the blueprint most veteran stars followed, and it's the one women's sports relied on for stability and legitimacy. Wilson helped build the foundation that the league stands on today. Without that foundation, the current surge of interest would look very different. Yet the rankings showed something new about the industry. Even with her resume, corporate America and mainstream media are placing increasing value on crossover appeal and national visibility. That doesn't erase Wilson's influence. It shows the sport is now stretching into multiple paths to power. She remains one of the most marketable and respected figures in the league. Her signature shoe, partnerships, and leadership roles are reminders of how much she has accomplished in a relatively short time. What made the Forbes gap so talked about online is that it highlighted how influence is no longer measured by a single metric. Fans and analysts pointed out that Wilson and Clark represent two different eras merging at the same moment. One built the league's credibility and competitive structure. The other accelerated its commercial growth and national reach. The contrast between their placements wasn't a statement about who deserved more. It was a signal that the criteria for measuring power in women's sports have expanded. A'ja Wilson's legacy is already secure. She's proven she can dominate the league, elevate her team, and lead a franchise to championships. Her presence on the list showed that she remains one of the most important figures in the sport. But what Forbes revealed is that women's basketball is no longer defined by one type of star. It's moving into an era where commercial influence and cultural momentum are just as valuable as trophies and awards. That's where A'ja Wilson fits into the bigger picture. Not in competition with Clark, but as part of a league where multiple kinds of influence now matter. She represents the history and tradition that carried women's basketball to this point. Clark represents the commercial wave that's pushing it into an entirely new space. And together, their presence on the same list reflects the evolution of a sport that's no longer bound by old definitions of power. As soon as the Forbes rankings were released, the online debate intensified. Fans had already been discussing the changing dynamic inside the league, but this list brought those conversations into the spotlight. Social media threads, comment sections, and podcasts began comparing Clark's new commercial influence with the accomplishments of established stars. None of this was an official rivalry or a personal conflict. It was a public reaction to a shifting balance of attention and opportunity that everyone could see unfolding.
A lot of the speculation online centers around how the league should value different types of success. Some fans argue that veteran athletes deserve more recognition for the consistency and leadership they've shown over the years. Others believe that the sport needs fresh momentum and new storylines to reach its next stage of growth. Those viewpoints clash frequently, not because one side is right or wrong, but because women's sports have never experienced this level of mainstream interest all at once. There are also ongoing discussions about how the media covers Clark's rise. Certain online communities suggest that her rapid success has influenced how brands and networks allocate attention. Others push back and say her visibility is a natural result of the audience she brings. These conversations aren't about undermining anyone's legacy. They reflect the growing pains of a sport stepping into the national spotlight after decades of building toward this moment. Even the comparisons between Clark and Wilson are largely fueled by fans and commentators. People debate whether the business side of the league should take priority or whether legacy and championships should matter more. None of this comes from official statements or confirmed tensions. It's speculation created by viewers trying to interpret a major shift happening in real time. Sports fans have always analyzed every detail of evolving storylines, and women's basketball is no different. Some observers believe the Forbes ranking will push athletes, teams, and media outlets to rethink how they measure influence. Others see it as a sign that a new generation is taking the sport in a different direction. The truth likely sits somewhere in the middle. The only thing everyone agrees on is that the league doesn't look the same as it did just a few years ago. The discussions, the theories, and the predictions aren't just noise. They show how deeply invested people have become. And when fans are debating every headline and analyzing every ranking, that's a sign the sport has entered a new phase. Speculation isn't a distraction. It's part of how cultural moments take shape. The online conversation represents a fan base that's suddenly bigger, louder, and more passionate than ever. And the Forbes list turned all of that energy into a national conversation. The real story behind this moment isn't just about rankings or endorsement deals. It's about a broader transformation happening across women's sports, a shift that has taken decades to build, but only recently broke through into the mainstream. For the first time, commercial power, media reach, and cultural influence are beginning to carry as much weight as championships and traditional accolades. The success of athletes like Clark shows that the ability to draw audiences and expand the market isn't a bonus to the sport anymore. It's a core part of its evolution. Women's basketball has always demonstrated high-level competition and top-tier talent. What changed is the business environment surrounding it. Brands, networks, and investors finally started treating women's sports as a growth market rather than an afterthought. Clark simply arrived at the exact moment when the world was ready to respond. That timing created a ripple effect that extended across teams, franchises, and entire fan communities. The league isn't just competing for attention, it's commanding it. That shift doesn't diminish the athletes who came before. In many ways, it validates the work they put in for years without the same financial backing or national platform. Stars like Wilson helped make the sport credible, respected, and competitive. Champions built a league worth investing in, and they proved that the talent was always there. The difference now is that more eyes are watching, more money is flowing in, and more doors are opening. The current wave of attention stands on the shoulders of that earlier foundation. As the business grows, so does the definition of leadership. Power in women's sports is no longer about one metric. It's about visibility, economic impact, social reach, community influence, and global recognition. This new era blurs the line between sports and entertainment, and that crossover is what turns athletes into cultural figures. Clark's rise isn't just the success of one player. It's proof that women's sports have entered a phase where star power and financial growth can coexist with elite competition. The Forbes ranking wasn't a prediction of where the league is going. It was a marker of what has already changed. It highlighted that the future of women's sports lies in a combination of on-court excellence and off-court influence. It showed that fans are hungry for stories, personalities, and movements, not just games. And it confirmed that the growth of the sport isn't slowing down, it's accelerating.
This deeper shift is what makes the moment historic. The sport is no longer waiting for recognition, it's earning it, demanding it, and expanding it. The spotlight is bigger, The stakes are higher, and the audience is growing faster than anyone expected. The power dynamics in women's sports aren't just changing, they've already changed. And the most exciting part is that this movement is still just getting started. The Forbes rankings weren't just a snapshot of where women's sports stand today, they were a preview of what's coming next. The WNBA has entered a phase where the biggest storylines aren't only happening on the court. They're unfolding in boardrooms, marketing departments, and national media. Companies are treating women's basketball as a business opportunity with long-term potential, not a temporary trend. That alone signals a major shift in how the league will operate moving forward. The 2025 season and beyond will test how the sport adapts to this new environment. Fans and analysts are already predicting bigger contracts, expanded sponsorships, and increased financial freedom for athletes across the league. As more brands enter the space, the value of star power and national recognition will only rise. Teams will have to innovate, leagues will need new strategies, and players will have more leverage than ever before. A business model that once focused on steady progress is transforming into one built around momentum and cultural relevance. This moment also changes what younger athletes believe is possible. The financial ceiling has been broken. The broadcast ceiling has been broken. The idea that women's sports need to prove themselves first is fading away. Clark's rise showed that the audience was waiting all along. Now that the demand is visible and measurable, the growth curve becomes exponential. More investment leads to more visibility. More visibility leads to more fans. And more fans lead to even greater opportunities. It also means the competition for influence will evolve. The veterans who built the sport and the new stars entering the league aren't on separate paths. They're part of the same movement. Every major platform, every brand partnership, and every broadcast deal will shape the future of the sport. The next few years will be defined not only by who wins games, but by who drives expansion, who grows the fan base, and who elevates women's basketball into the next stage of its evolution. If there's one takeaway from the Forbes list, it's this. The power structure of women's sports no longer follows traditional rules. Athletes are stepping into roles that go far beyond competition. They are influencing culture, economics, media, and national conversation. And once that shift begins, it doesn't stop. The next chapter isn't just about one player or one ranking. It's about a league discovering what it looks like when star power, financial growth, and cultural impact collide at the same moment. Women's basketball has moved into a new era, one where the spotlight is permanent, the opportunities are expanding, and the story is still being written.